Welcome to Just Bold Enough, where we explore Bold Capital's partners' mission to invest in healthcare and technology companies that disrupt industries and uplift humanity. We'll share expert insights and have engaging discussions on impact, investment philosophy, and our perspective on the very issues shaping our world. Get ready to embrace innovation with purpose. This is Just Bold Enough. Here we go again with another episode of Just Bold Enough. Today, we're going to take a look at why we invested. Our investment is Insilico Medicine. Insilico Medicine was founded by a brilliant scientist entrepreneur, Alex Zhavoronkov, in all of 2014. We actually invested in 1819, but even back in 2014, Alex brought generative AI to drug discovery. And that's really what Insilico Medicine does. I am joined by my great co-host, Felicia Su.
Hi there,
Hey,
Timur.
Felicia. How are you doing?
I am great. I'm very excited to talk about generative AI, especially because it's a buzzword now, and we get to say that we found it almost 10 years ago. So
I know.
particularly excited. Yeah.
Crazy. So why don't we start with two things? Why don't we give a very quick primer to our audience on two things? One on drug discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love you to take the lead on that, please.
Okay.
And then the second on AI. And once we've given those two primers, we can discuss the incredible things that Insilico has done.
Amazing. I almost laughed because I don't know if you realize the pun that you just inserted, which is pretty great. Yeah,
what
primer.
Was it?
Primer.
Oh, very good. Yeah, well,
I know your brilliance.
Yeah, it comes naturally. What can I say?
I knew that was coming. So drug discovery. So it's a pretty black box, I would say, in pharma in terms of people understanding it. But at the end of the day, if you think about two things that are the most important, it's a very onerous process. You want to find a target. It's kind of like, what is your bullseye? And then you want to find...
what's a target? What does that mean?
Yeah. So the target is essentially when you come up with a drug, it's what the drug will go and interact with. So to give you a sense, the process of finding a target takes usually about 5 to 10 years. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars, and that might even be really conservative. It's basically a trial and error process that you would hope is a lot more efficient, but it's actually a very mechanical one, and like finding a needle in a haystack. And there are many different types of targets. For simplicity's sake, I'll just focus on one, I think. So the most common one is something called an enzyme. And that one people, I think people have heard of that. It's basically a type of protein that speeds up a process, a chemical reaction. I'll just give, a really a very tangible example is, let's just say you have a room full of different sized balls that are floating around, shooting around, right? And there's a hole at the end of the room and you want the balls to go through that hole. It's kind of like playing pool. And there's large balls and there's small ones. And so the small ones have no problem just shooting right through. Great. The large ones need a little bit of help. And so an enzyme, for example, will go and smush the large balls such that they can then fit through the end hole. And so that's an example of a target. There are other ones like receptors and things like that, but I won't get too much into the weeds. But
and
you basically
those
want
targets impact biological pathways, which are associated either with a disease or with something. If you change the target, it's going to decrease the impact in that biological pathway. Okay.
So sometimes you can make something more active. Sometimes you can block something. Those two are kind of your most common things. And then based on that, you affect downstream processes in the body that you then hope will treat something.
and the molecule is what you're using to turn the target on or off, accelerate it, whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It's like the bullet that hits the bullseye.
And that also is like searching for a needle in a haystack.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
And it gets especially difficult. And, you know, I think this is where Insilico, we'll talk more about this later, but when you have diseases, I wish I could say that, you know, if you have this disease, one thing is wrong in your body. And if you just fix that one thing, then you're cured and done. Unfortunately, it's usually a whole list of things, and we don't tend to know all the pathways that are involved. And so that's what makes drug discovery extremely difficult when you don't really know. Not only are you looking for one needle, but you may be looking for 50 needles and you just don't know. Yeah.
So, in a successful drug, it might take $2-3 billion to get it to market, of which half of that is that process of discovery of what's the appropriate target and what's the appropriate molecule. Okay, so that's drug discovery. Let's talk about AI for a second. And obviously, generative AI has been in the news courtesy of ChatGPT, but
we should have just asked ChatGPT to give the primer.
Yeah, we should have. But AI literally started after the Second World War and has slowly been making progress. Alan Turing was one of the first to really sort of postulate some metrics as to when would AI sound and be equivalent to a human. And today, what's really interesting, and I'm going to actually use an example. There are two kinds of AI broadly. There is predictive AI and there is generative AI. Predictive AI is actually quite easy to understand. It is correlations, if you will, on steroids. It's the ability to take both structured and unstructured data. Unstructured data could be images. Structured data is numbers. We've been for hundreds of years doing correlations between numbers to be able to predict something. Okay. Now, what's happening is that we're able to absorb unstructured data, which could be text, which could be feeds from Twitter and Facebook, take all of that data to create much more sophisticated predictive models. And predictive AI should be part of any business's lexicon or tool set. Generative AI is a little more transformative. And a good example is, it was in 2017. Google came up with AlphaZero. And AlphaZero, a chess playing program, which used generative AI. I'm going to tell you exactly what they did. And it absolutely destroyed the most powerful open source program called Stockfish, which no one thought anyone would ever be able to beat. And Stockfish is old compute. It's fundamentally brute force computing of going and identifying.
Basically just like a bunch of rules?
Like it's when you say brute force, a bunch of rules, and it's going down every conceivable alternative. It is, okay, if I turn left and then I turn right and then I turn left and I move this, it's literally brute force. Now, it's supplanted by, okay, well, let's kind of, there is 2,000-3,000 years of history of playing chess. Let's take a lot of understood moves where turning left at this point, if I take a look at all the moves that people have done over the last 2,000 years, is probably a bad probability move. I should turn right. So it reduces that set of brute force trying everything by using 3,000 years of experience of people playing chess.
In some ways,
AlphaZero did something quite different.
Could you almost say that it's a bit more of an intelligent version of AI then? Or is that not the right way to put it?
It's not even intelligent. It's not AI. Stockfish is brute force computing.
Got it.
It is, here are all the alternatives. Let me try every single one of them and see which one will win. And with huge compute power, you can do that. And it was truly, it got to the point that chess masters couldn't beat it, and no one thought anything would be able to beat it. Out comes AlphaZero. The first thing about AlphaZero is it used generative AI with neural networks, and generative adversarial networks, GANs, are you take two AI programs and they play each other. And in the case of AlphaZero, what the AI programs were given was the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. That's it. A rook can do X, a king can do Y, a pawn can do Z, and the task of winning. That was it. Mm. Then the computers played each other, and as they played each other, they became better and better and better. And these GANs then created much more through the neural networks, less of a brute force approach and much more a pattern recognition approach, which up until then was very much what humans could do that computers couldn't.
It reminds me of when you walk into an exam and you've memorized a bunch of stats. You're not going to do nearly as well as if you went and understood the mechanisms and the foundation, are able to then apply it to, all the different scenarios, which I would say is MIT in a nutshell.
Yeah.
You're probably from your time and my time.
That's right. That's right.
So that's interesting.
The understanding, the underlying principles, but pattern recognition was a very human-centric ability. And computers couldn't really do that. AlphaZero, in about 4 hours, learned how to do that, destroyed Stockfish. But more importantly, and that's the part about generative, which is so compelling, is that it created strategies and tactics that in 3,000 years playing chess, no one had ever seen before.
Yeah.
And that's the part where all of a sudden you're in a different realm.
Yeah.
Because the machines created approaches that 3,000 years of humans playing this game had never tried. And that is truly disruptive. And that happened all the way back in 2017. We're 2024. At the pace of technological change, you can imagine how much progress has happened. So let's take that back to Insilico. We have the needle in the haystack problem, which historically we were tackling in a very brute force way, right? It would be, let me go in the lab, let me try this, let me try that. Endless trial and error, very, very expensive. Leading the $2-3 billion of expense to create a successful drug. Alex took GANs and created fundamentally two AIs, a biological AI and a chemistry AI. The biological AI is an AI to identify novel targets, what you described at the beginning of this podcast. The chemistry AI identified novel molecules. So the first thing that you do is you do generative AI to create targets that have not been identified before. Then use the chemistry AI platform to find molecules that will impact those targets. The proof's in the pudding. They today have a number of assets in their pipeline. The most advanced one is for IBF. And maybe you can take 2 seconds and explain what...
I was waiting for you to say WTF is IPF, but that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Close enough.
So IPF, so that's idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Anytime you hear the word fibrosis, you just think of a scar. So in the same way that, scar tissue is super tight, it's stiff, you can't really move it much. Think of that like your lungs. So your lungs should be this cavity that is very flexible and can expand and shrink and expand and shrink as you're breathing to push out and inhale air, right? Obviously, there are a lot of problems when that cavity becomes really stiff to the point where it gets really restricted. And instead of being able to take a whole deep breath in, you only take a little bit. And so that's essentially what IPF is. And there's many different reasons for it. It's one of probably the hardest diseases to treat.
Why?
It's so multifactorial. And I think the reason why I can't tell you a pinpoint answer of what's causing it, like in the way that I can say smoking and COPD, it's a relatively, all the pathways that I was telling you about before in the target, you wish it was just one, right, that you can figure out. This one has got so many and more that we have yet to discover that it becomes even harder. And so that's why something like Insilico, when you can actually stop looking at it like a needle in a haystack problem, you can actually have a chance at influencing it more.
So what's extraordinary is that what takes a process which could take 5 to 8 years to discover a novel target and a novel molecule, they did that in 18 months.
Wow.
That same process typically will cost in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They did that in with $2.6 million, including some of their initial clinical trials. And now they are in phase 1 clinical trials for that particular asset.
So I'm kind of curious because pharma, is I would say on average, is a very distrusting industry, right? And for good reason.
Yeah, I mean, they are used to having to take things through very extensive clinical trials.
Regulatory
and they've
processes,
seen a lot of things fail, which looked promising at the beginning.
Yeah. What was pharma's reaction? Like in the very early days when Insilico kind of said, we can promise less cost and faster to find targets that work. What was their response?
I think until conceptually great, in practice, show me. Until some drugs generated through these processes would successfully go through clinical trials. I don't know that it's so much that they are distrustful, but jaundiced is probably a better description in that there are so many trial and error efforts in the industry which lead to failures that it really is until you have taken it through the full process, no one is going to believe it. Yeah. However, the cost of taking it through the full process with an Insilico is so dramatically less that you're really opening a very, very different modality to do drug discovery.
It's kind of like for them to pay a penny just to see if there's even the remote chance that this could work is worth it. But at the same time, they need to see those clinical, trial success to show that promise. And I mean, I think for Insilico, it reminds me of when you take that first step, you take that risk in the company that no one else wants to. But as soon as they show that pharma can trust their results, which I think Insilico is starting to get to now, they have now effectively become the trendsetter for AI and pharma. with many, many companies following in its footsteps. So
yes, and obviously, sort of, we invested 5-6 years ago, and now the company has filed for an IPO, and hopefully we will see a lot of success over there. Before going through the IPO, I think I want to go back to the team, the convergence of technologies, which is one of the themes that we always go back to. Alex is one of those rare animals who is both a very, very accomplished scientist. He has a BS in computer science. He has an MS in biotech from Johns Hopkins. He has a PhD in physics from the Moscow State University, which is probably one of the leading universities in physics in the world. And at the same time, he is an incredible entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And
Visionary.
yes, it's really quite exceptional, because you need the vision. And by the way, Alex is his passion is longevity. And a lot of his work has been focused around understanding what are the drivers of longevity. Insilico is very much part of that journey. He started way back in 2014 in the earliest days of generative AI, and today has pharma, big pharma as partners, CROs as partners, and probably 100 to 200 of the top scientists in the world, both on the compute side and on the biology and chemistry side. And it is very much this convergence of those three disciplines which is driving Insilico's success.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think Alex is one of those, you meet him and you realize he is one of those visionaries, and you kind of need someone like that for a company like Insilico when they're so ahead of their time, because you need someone who almost sounds just crazy enough, right? I guess, so what does Alex have in store for Insilico in the coming, 1 to 2 to 3 years?
So first of all, they have a pretty significant pipeline of novel molecules and drugs. Some of them they have not announced. The IPF is announced, is in clinical trials, but they have others that are coming up. And I think in the next year or two, we're going to see some pretty dramatic therapeutics coming out of Insilico. On the business side, I guess once the markets become a little bit more hospitable, they will go through with their IPO in the next 3 to 6 months. They're actually doing it first on the Hong Kong exchange, and then I suspect they will also do it on the NASDAQ over the next 2 to 3 years.
How do you tend to see international IPOs?
Look, the American market is the most liquid and the most followed market in the world. Notwithstanding that, we have seen over the last 30 to 40 years some of the international markets getting more prevalence. But there is no doubt that still NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange are the largest by any size. China, however, is very much an economy in the ascendancy. It's both a very large consumer market, obviously, and one that is becoming extremely affluent. Even though the Hong Kong exchange today is far less liquid than the NASDAQ, I think over the years we're going to see Eastern markets become quite important. European markets remain fairly important, but you will see more globalization, I have to believe. So if we were kind of really going to recap why we invested in Insilico and why we're excited by Insilico, I always like to give that one to you. So
you're playing to your professor-like demeanor, Timur.
Really?
I love it.
All right.
No, I'm
Okay.
just kidding. It's okay. I'll be forever a student. It's okay. Yeah, no, I mean, Insilico. So Insilico is essentially generative AI partnered with drug discovery in the pharma industry. And drug discovery in the pharma industry is something that's very time intensive, cost sinking. And is honestly like a very mechanical process of finding a needle or multiple needles in a haystack when you don't even know what needles you're supposed to be looking for. And so what Insilico has done is basically 10, 12 years ahead of its time, because now the world knows generative AI, but people back then, not so much. And along with that, the second point is that in an industry like pharma, gaining trust is very important and showing efficacy. And I would say it has been a difficult journey for Insilico, but they're now crossing that barrier. I get the news articles of New Deal, Insilico, and whatever big pharma company. And so I think because of that, they are now the trendsetter. And really, that goes to show that when we look at the company, again, as we always say, it's the they.
Yeah,
it's who it is that who is it that we're backing, that we want to work with. And Alex, in particular, represents a sort of very, visionary kind of founder, the person who can get on a podium and convince 100 people to come work for what sounds like a crazy idea. And we went along for that ride, and we're super excited. And I think it has really shaped actually how we see generative AI, and how it might even inform how we think about it in the future when we invest
actually,
too.
And I would say that it emphasizes our belief that while there will be these global mass platforms and large language models like ChatGPT, like Meta's and so on, and Google's own version, a lot, if not most of the opportunities in generative AI are going to be in verticals, where those verticals have access to proprietary data, which is not just scraped from the web. And that, I think for us, is where we're focusing a lot of our investment activity. Before we close, again, I want to thank our listeners for joining us. And as always, we invite you to, if you enjoyed the podcast, post it on your social media. What do you want to talk about on our next podcast, Felicia? Any thoughts? Any companies that you want to highlight?
Oh, so many to choose from. Why don't we go for obesity?
Obesity.
Why don't we talk about the Wegovy,
very
Ozempic?
much in the zeitgeist.
Yes.
Did anyone know what Ozempic was a year ago? I think it's on everyone's.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
So I guess what they know is Wegovy, right?
Well, Wegovy, Ozempic.
Same thing.
All right. So stay tuned. Our next podcast will talk to you about obesity. Once again, Felicia and I thank you for joining us.
Thank you for tuning in to Just Bold Enough, where we aim to change the world by bridging sci-fi with reality. Follow us for more insights, updates, and stories of transformation. Stay bold, stay inspired, and remember, the future is as bold as we dare to dream.